Most gardeners ruin their soil by trying to keep everything too clean, too controlled, and too sterile. They rinse nutrients out of compost, dilute every input until it's harmless, and panic the moment something smells, well, too strong. The real consequence shows up months later as weak root systems, nutrient lockups, fungal pressure, and beds that need constant feeding just to limp along. The ferment we're talking about today was labelled unsafe precisely because it works too well when misunderstood, and history shows that soil didn't become fragile until we stopped using it. The mistake modern gardeners make is fearing fermentation instead of understanding it. For thousands of years, soil wasn't fed with soluble nutrients or bottled microbes. It was inoculated. Fermented inputs were used to seed biology directly into the soil, not to fertilize plants in the short term. The problem today is that fermentation gets treated like a nutrient tea, when it's really a biological catalyst. When gardeners apply it like fertilizer, they scorch roots, spike ammonia, or create anaerobic pockets. But when it's used the way it was historically intended, it builds soil that feeds crops for decades with minimal intervention. This ferment wasn't unsafe, it was just never meant to be rushed. The ferment I'm talking about is a lactic acid-driven organic ferment made from waste carbohydrates and microbial-rich inputs. Historically, that meant grain wash, old bread soak, whey, rice rinse, or diluted milk cultures allowed to sour fully before soil contact. The safety issue was never toxicity, it was misuse. Fresh ferment applied directly to roots will burn. Fully finished ferment applied to soil biology does the opposite. It stabilizes nutrients, locks nitrogen into microbial bodies, and dramatically improves aggregation. In my own beds, the difference between a rushed ferment and a finished one was honestly the difference between stunted seedlings and explosive root growth. The smell tells you everything. If it's sharp, sour, acidic, that means it's still breaking down sugars. But when it smells earthy, slightly yeasty and stable, well, that means it's ready. This ferment was never poured straight onto plants. Instead, it was applied to soil surfaces, compost layers, and carbon-heavy zones where microbes needed a bit of extra energy. In a backyard bed, that means watering it into mulch, leaf mold, or just the top inch of soil, not into bare dirt. Historically, 1 part finished ferment was diluted into, say, 20 to 30 parts water and applied once or twice per season, not weekly. In raised beds, I apply about 1 quart of diluted ferment per 8 square feet, always after watering the bed first, so the soil is moist but not saturated. The goal here is microbial uptake, not leaching. Within days, the soil smell changes, worm activity increases, and compaction begins to disappear without any tilling at all. Plants don't actually want raw nutrients. What they really need are microbial intermediaries. This ferment, well, it feeds bacteria, which then feed fungi, and those fungi go on to trade nutrients with plant roots. That's honestly the missing link in most gardens. People add nitrogen and then wonder why disease pressure increases. They add phosphorus and wonder why, roots don't expand. The ferment, it creates biological demand first, and that's what prevents excess nutrient accumulation. In hydroponic systems, this is, frankly, where most gardeners get into trouble. You simply cannot apply this ferment directly to the nutrient solution. What I've tested successfully is inoculating biofilters or media beds at an extremely low dilution, something like 1 part ferment to 100 parts water, and then allowing it to cycle for several days before the plants are exposed. If you do it correctly, root biofilms stabilize, pH swings are reduced, and nutrient uptake becomes much more consistent. Traditional compost didn't rely on turning piles constantly. It relied on inoculation. Fermented inputs were layered into carbon-heavy compost to jumpstart microbial dominance early. When those ferments disappeared from practice, composting became mechanical instead of biological. Turning replaced inoculation, time replaced efficiency. When I reintroduced fermented inputs into my compost layers, I stopped turning entirely. Honestly, heat became consistent, breakdown accelerated, and fungal networks formed earlier instead of later. The pile finished underground, not in the bin. This ferment isn't dangerous, but it is unpredictable in untrained hands. If applied too strong, it can drop soil pH rapidly. If sealed improperly, it can produce ammonia. And if poured into anaerobic soil, it can temporarily suppress roots. Institutions prefer controlled inputs with predictable outcomes, even if they're weaker. This ferment doesn't fit that model. It rewards observation, restraint, and timing. That's why it survived in farms, gardens, and households, but disappeared from manuals. I only apply fully finished ferment, diluted heavily into biologically active zones. I never apply it to seedlings. I never apply it to dry soil. I never use it more than twice per season per bed. In winter, I apply it to mulch layers to pre-charge soil biology for spring. In summer, I apply it after heavy harvest to rebuild microbial populations. The payoff isn't immediate green growth, it's resilience. Plants handle heat better, disease pressure drops, water retention improves, beds need less intervention every year. Soil didn't used to be managed, it was maintained. Ferments like this were part of that maintenance cycle, not a hack or shortcut. When we removed them, we replaced biology with inputs. The result is soil that needs constant correction instead of one that self-regulates. This ferment didn't build healthy soil because it was powerful. It built healthy soil because it fed the right organisms at the right stage. If you grow food seriously, you don't need more products. You need better timing and fewer inputs that fight each other. Fermentation isn't about boosting growth. It's about restoring processes. When you understand that, this unsafe ferment becomes one of the safest tools you can use. If this kind of grounded, experience-driven gardening knowledge matters to you, subscribe to Gentle Herb Gardening and share this video with someone who's tired of chasing fixes instead of building soil that works on its own.